You've traveled to another dimension, a dimension not only of contradiction and speculation, but also one that defies logic and is based on blind faith, a journey into a nebulous land whose limits are that of imagination. You've just crossed over into the evolution zone. Seek and save the lost the way Jesus did. There's only a certain amount of time left. I have time off. So use the ball, use your testicles to reach out to the ball. What you're about to see was not planned. There was no script, there were no writers, there were no cameras, no production crew, no lighting, no graphic artists, and no editors. The entire program just happened. There was a big bang in our production studio. And here we are.
Could you believe that? Of course you couldn't. Nobody in his right mind could. And yet many evolutionists would have us believe that in the name of science. There was no creator, no space, no energy, no matter. There was nothing. And then there was this big bang, and out came the sea and the land. And birds and flowers and trees and elephants and giraffes and horses and cats and dogs. And of course, man and women. And this took countless millions of years. We're now going to look closely at some of the believers of the theory of evolution. And we want you to listen very closely to the type of language they use. True believers use what we call the language of speculation. They'll start off sounding like an expert, but because there's such a lack of factual evidence for the theory, they're forced to use words like we surmise, we believe, perhaps, maybe, could have, and possibly. And then they'll end up saying things like, well, I really don't know, I'm not an expert. So watch for these phrases and for these words. So do you believe in the theory of evolution?
I do.
Do you believe man evolved from apes?
Yeah, because of biological evidence, I believe that.
So do you think man evolved from apes?
Yeah, I do believe man evolved from apes.
Do you believe in the theory of evolution?
Yes, definitely.
Could you be specific about the evidence?
How the planet Earth evolved from heavy particles and matter coming together, and then slowly as it cooled off, single-cell life forms developed in the ocean, and then slowly they evolved into multi-celled organisms, and then eventually into humans.
How did it begin?
I don't know. Probably the Big Bang Theory.
What caused the Big Bang?
Probably an asteroid from another planet that had the same thing happen to it millions of years ago.
Where did the other planet come from?
I don't know. I really don't know.
There's a lot of things. I mean, you look at, first of all, like homologous structures in animals and analogous structures and these things called vestigial organs.
Did they come out of the sea?
Yeah. Yeah, that's where they evolved, because that's the only place that could support life.
Okay, when they came out of the sea, was there air?
Was there air? It took a while, but yeah, air eventually, because of the breakdown of atoms and stuff, and it was eventually released. So yeah, I think there was air when they came out, because
When they came out, what came out of the ocean?
I don't know. You tell me.
So do you think we were originally fish?
I mean, it's possible.
Did it come out as a dog?
Probably not.
What was
Probably didn't come out as a mammal at all. It probably came out as a reptile and evolved that way.
it? So you think we lived under the water?
It's possible at some point.
When we were under the water, do you think we had lungs or gills?
Oof.
Because I'm trying to think, here is this sort of animal who's coming out of the ocean without lungs. So he comes out with gills, goes, runs back to water and just keeps coming out until lungs develop.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, this animal that came out
Wow.
was in the sea, so obviously had gills. When it came up out of the land, did it have lungs onto the land?
It could have either been amphibious or possibly even just had to evolve from having gills and not being able to survive without them.
So you think we may have come from birds?
It's possible. You know, it's really possible from anything.
The first dog that came out, well, it came up as a reptile, whatever it was, from an amoeba that was underwater that had gills and developed lungs and came up onto the land as a reptile. Was it male or female?
Probably unisex.
So when did it, and why did it change from asexual to bisexual, having male or female?
Probably when it, maybe from hydras or maybe some form of, meiosis, like between a male and a female.
So the first reptile that was under the sea as an amoeba, for millions of years, developed lungs under the water, put up on the land, was unisex.
Probably.
Probably.
Probably. I can't say for sure.
Was it a male or female that came out of the change?
It would be both, maybe a hermaphroditic.
So do you think we could have evolved from horses?
Sure.
This animal that came out without lungs and breathed and went back in, was he male or female?
I don't know. He could, yeah. He could have been a hermaphrodite.
He was male and female?
Yeah, probably.
And he was alone?
I don't know. Could have been.
So he could have been alone?
Could have been alone.
So how did he reproduce?
I don't know. Asexually.
He split in two?
He could have.
Yeah. And this is the evidence that this teacher gave you?
His was a lot more in depth, but I don't remember it all. Sorry.
Well, I really have no idea. I'm not an expert on that subject.
But then you gotta know that I'm not authoritative.
You're not an authority on evolution?
I'm a personal person, you know what I mean? Like, with no major degree or anything.
Do you think God had anything to do with this?
That's an area I have never explored, but it's hard not to believe that sometimes.
Okay, here's a simple lesson on evolution. The theory of evolution basically teaches that every living creature, like you and me, evolved from a single cell billions of years ago. So that means that every animal supposedly transformed into another kind of animal over time. Now, the big problem evolutionists have is that they're finding a huge gap in the fossil record. In other words, when archaeologists dig up the bones of these dead animals, they don't find these transitional forms that helped one animal transform into another animal. And if you don't have those bones, you can't prove evolution ever happened. That's what they're calling the missing link. And there's not just one. There would have to be thousands and thousands of those transitional forms. The truth is, they're not missing at all. They never existed in the first place. Now, maybe you're asking, what about the proof? I mean, what about those science teachers that showed us those drawings of apes all hunched over and then eventually straightening themselves up and becoming very man-like? Well, remember, those are just drawings. That's not proof. The real proof is in what we can find in the fossil record, the bones that we dig up, and that's what's missing, the actual proof. In reality, this is what scientists actually have. Me and the monkey. Apes and humans. The supposed transitional forms are what are known as the missing links. But the truth is, there is no missing link. There's nothing to link apes to human. The supposed transitional forms simply don't exist. Except in the imagination of evolutionists who want to justify their theory. For instance, the amazing discovery of Lucy. But now, nearly all experts agree that Lucy was just the skeleton of a 3-foot-tall chimpanzee. Or Nebraska Man. They created an entire skeleton with arms, legs, feet, hands, even facial features, when all they really had was one tooth, which later was found to be the tooth of an extinct pig. or Piltdown Man. The jawbone turned out to belong to a modern ape. And of course, Neanderthal Man, whose famous skeleton found in France over 50 years ago was that of an old man who suffered from arthritis. Hardly scientific proof.
Listen to what the famous Harvard evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould said about the fossil record.
The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil records persists as the trade secret of paleontology.
Have you ever been mystified as to why human beings and apes have so many similar features? After all, compare our hands to the hands of apes. They're very similar, and our feet are a lot the same. In fact, we can make many of the same facial expressions and other things that apes can do. To prove this point, we hired an orangutan for the day and had some fun. Check this out. When I'm happy, my face goes something like this. When I'm embarrassed. If I don't agree. If I want to be nasty. If I've heard a bad joke. If I've heard enough. If I'm feeling affectionate. If I agree. Does this prove that men evolved from apes? No, not at all. Think of it like this. Think of the biplane and the 747 jumbo jet. They're both very similar. After all, they both have wings, they both have landing gear, cockpits. Does that mean that the jet evolved from the little biplane? Not at all. It just means they have a common designer. The designer used a similar blueprint for each one. Same with us. God, the creator of the world and the universe, is our common designer. He simply used a similar blueprint when creating the hands and feet and facial expressions of men and apes.
Despite the fact that there is no evidence when it comes to the theory of evolution, we're continually told that primates are our relatives. So we decided we'd have a little fun and call a number of airlines and ask if we could have a relative fly on the plane with us. Despite the fact that airlines won't allow primates on planes for obvious reasons, there are some scientists who have us believe that primates are just about as intelligent as human beings. So Kirk and I took an orangutan to lunch to see if it was true. The incident reinforced the fact that the primate is limited when it comes to the unique ability, the human ability to reason, to invent, to appreciate the sound of music. You see, you don't get orangutans forming themselves into an orchestra. You don't get them forming themselves into a court system to mete out justice to its fellow creatures. This isn't because he's a prehistoric man who is less evolved than us. But it's because he's another species.
The revered father of evolution, the man who really made the theory popular, is Charles Darwin. He wrote Origin of Species and the Descent of Man. Ladies, listen to what he had to say about women. The chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than women can attain, whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands. Did you hear that? He's saying that man has evolved to a higher eminence over women in basically anything he decides to do, whether it requires reason, imagination, or deep thought. Darwinian evolution, at its core, is not only male chauvinistic, but it's also very racist. Charles Darwin wants us to believe that black people are less evolved than whites.
If we can't convince you of how unscientific the theory of evolution is, perhaps these following experts can.
Ernest Chain, Nobel Prize winner, said in reference to the theory of evolution, "I would rather believe in fairies than in such wild speculation." Sir Arthur Keith, the physical anthropologist and anatomist who wrote the foreword to Darwin's Origin of the Species 100th Anniversary Edition, said, "Evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it only because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable." Malcolm Muggeridge, British journalist and philosopher, said, "I myself am convinced that the theory of evolution, especially the extent to which it's been applied, will be one of the great jokes in history books of the future."
A wise man once said, "Man will believe anything as long as it's not in the Bible." Unfortunately, that is so true.
Can you give me any example of a transitional form, going from one kind of an animal to another kind?
Transitional form between one and another. Well, the thing is, it already is an animal, whatever it is. You mean like saying one that's halfway between this and this animal? Can't think of anything right off the moment.
The parrot that's on your arm, God created. How could science make a parrot?
Science, nature made it.
Nature made itself?
Yes, absolutely.
So they made the parrot.
Evolution.
So evolution made it?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't believe God created things?
Well, I don't know what you're referring to as God.
Creator.
To me, evolution, nature is God.
When it comes to evolution, what was the scientific fact that convinced you that it was right?
I would say how it all got started, like explaining how we have elements that were brought to Earth by, like would say meteorites or whatever, that it all got started in the ocean, and organisms grew, and people evolved from there.
Believe in the Bible?
Yes, I do.
So you believe in Adam and Eve?
Yes, I do. So,
Was Adam used to be an ape?
No.
Did he crawl up out of slime?
No.
So which way are you going to go? Did God create man in his image and tell him to bring forth after his own kind, or did he begin as some slime from a meteorite from outer space?
Non-random changes that come about as a result of selection, okay?
Who's doing the selecting?
Selecting is being done by the ecosystem.
And where did this come from?
It's being done by predators.
Where did it come from?
It's being done by geological processes. Well, here, this is the big question. This is where atheists and theists both have a problem, okay? And I'm going to admit to it, okay? The problem we have is at the beginning. The problem we have is at the beginning. The problem we have is at the beginning.
Here's a very interesting fact. In the last couple of dozen times that I've witnessed to someone, I can honestly say that the subject of evolution has not come up even once. Why? Because I didn't bring it up. I didn't have to. And it doesn't come up on its own because it's often a non-issue. When you learn how to speak to a person's conscience and circumnavigate the intellect, the subject of evolution seems to disappear.
Now this is real good news for people like me. It means I don't have to become an expert in the fossil record. And it also means I don't have to learn words like Rhinorhynchothachosaurus.
Now, are we trying to be anti-intellectual or avoid talking about the subject of evolution? Of course not. That's why we have the Evidence Bible. And this is packed full of teaching on the subject and includes quotes from teachings from Charles Darwin, Stephen Jay Gould, and William Huxley. And it will show you that the theory of evolution is unscientific, that it's based on blind faith, so that you don't need to panic and upset yourself every time you read in the newspaper or see something on the news that talks about man evolving from apes. You can have confidence in God's Word, that we are made in God's image. And true science, even our common sense, supports the Bible and not the theory of evolution.
Let's look at the church and ask, what is the purpose of the church on earth?
Let's look at an analogy that's going to make a very important point. Let's say you're on an airplane and you're trying to convince another passenger to put on a parachute because you know at any moment he's going to have to jump 25,000 feet out of the plane. You have two lines of reasoning. The first is, you try to convince him that the plane was made by Boeing. Now, this is important because it will give credibility to the emergency card, which will tell him about the parachute. So, you point out the fact that the maker's name is written all over the plane. He doesn't buy it. He thinks the plane happened by accident. Then, you tell him that it's a relatively new plane. He thinks it's an old plane. You say you have proof, so does he. And as long as you disagree, he ignores the emergency card and you find yourself in a frustrating and perilous situation.
The second line of reasoning is much easier. All you do is you tell him about the law of gravity. And you say what it will do to him if he jumps 25,000 feet on his frail body. His eyes widen with fear, and he says, "Hey, would you pass me that emergency card thing? I want to check it out." Now, you and I want to convince sinners to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. We can talk to them about God and His existence. We can talk to them about the age of the earth, and how old it is or how young it is. And this leads to all sorts of discussions which often end in arguments. Or we can tell them about the jump, that he has to pass through the door of death and face a holy God and a holy law, whether he believes in God or not, on the day of judgment. We show him the 10 Commandments, which stir the conscience and bring the knowledge of sin. He realizes his danger and sees his need to put on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Tony, would you consider yourself to be a good person?
Yeah.
To learn more about the theory of evolution and how to reach the lost the way Jesus did, please go to our website at wayofthemaster.com and get a hold of the Evidence Bible. It's packed full of tools to help you share your faith. You can also get it at your local bookstore.
And don't forget about the Way of the Master book. That's our most important book, and also the foundation course that many churches are using to train up their people.